So I already mentioned it. We have a new baby in our house. We're very excited. I don't know if any of you up here heard when Tammy asked the icebreaker question. Uh, Ellie's immediate and confident answer was Olive. That was her thing, right? I think my wife said naps, which I'm probably on that list, right? We have a new baby in our house. It's been, almost 9 years since we've had somebody this little in our house because our other kids are 10 and 9. They grew up very close together. And so, rhythms change over time. The way our family operates is very different this week, even from last week. And we've been talking to our kids about we need to establish healthy rhythms because, whether you've done it or seen it done, if you don't create rhythms, and I could even say like systems or plans, the baby ends up running the house because all they know is, Mom, I'm hungry. Mom, my diaper's dirty, right? But we're trying to train and create rhythms for a healthy, sustainable life for our family, right? So that makes sense. And we've been talking about that. And I loved last week, Lisa, our guest speaker from Bloomington, helped us understand how these rhythms also change with your season of life. See, it's not just one list. Well, here's the 5 things that you need to do to be a good Christian, no matter what. No, we all need to contextualize these things for what works for us, our personality, the way God wired us, and the season of life that we're in. And when you enter a new season, you need new rhythms. Well, that's part of what I want to talk to you about today is that as a church, we are entering a new season. I know you think, well, we just entered a new season 6 months ago because we moved to a new location. And I'm not saying that newness is over, but we're entering a new season. I don't know if you remember, we haven't talked about it because we've been so busy with moving and all of the things, right? But the Lord spoke to us as a church very clearly last year and talked to us about how 2025 was an opportunity for us to join him in the harvest. That just as the scripture says, the fields are like white, their harvest is ready. There are people who need Jesus. I loved a friend of mine when Brittany and I were first discerning church planting. The first question a church planter asks is, well, where am I going to plant? Am I going to be bougie and say, well, I'm going to go plant in Hawaii because that's like the nice, or am I going to go to the streets of Detroit? Like, that's always a big question. I loved the wisdom of my friend because he said, the best place to plant churches is where the humans are. Right? We need to reach people wherever they are. We need vibrant communities of hope like we're trying to build here in the Heights and beyond. We need that, okay? The Lord was talking to us about the harvest, and I believe that in order to participate in the harvest, which has more to do with God's kingdom than Vineyard Church, but I think we have an opportunity or the option to be part of it in a way that will also bless us. If we can keep our eyes focused on Jesus and his kingdom, doing his mission and his work, participating in his harvest, then we will also receive the blessing as we go. In order to do that, there is preparation that happens. And we're going to talk about some of these practices and give you a why as to why we are right now pressing in to practices that create space for transformation. All right, I'm going to back up and go where we were going now. Ephesians 4, just a few verses. Ephesians 4:21. Since you have heard about Jesus and have learned the truth that comes from him, throw off your old sinful nature and your former way of life. Now, he's talking to Gentiles, and there was a specific cultural norm. We could identify that. We could substitute and sort of pretend that he's talking to us as Americans, right? He says, throw off your old sinful nature, your former way of life, which is corrupted by lust and deception. Instead, let the Spirit renew your thoughts and your attitudes. Put on your new nature, created to be like God, truly righteous and holy. Now I'm going to define that for you. Righteous and holy, simply the simplest way I can define it, it's to be right with God and set apart for a purpose. Okay? And I know in this room I don't have to hammer this real hard, but we don't get right with God by the things we do. The Bible tells us that righteousness is a gift from God. It's something He gives us. We don't earn it. We don't curry His favor to get it. He gives it to us as a gift, and we receive it in faith. You can be considered made right with God, in right relationship, in correct relationship with God by receiving that gift. And to be holy is not to say, I am better than you because I kept more of the rules. It's to say, no, I understand that I am set apart for a purpose because my relationship with God has opened the door into His kingdom, and I'm now partnering with Him to see Jesus' name extended to those who are lost and don't have hope. That's what we're talking about. And I don't know about you, but when I dig into that definition, I'm like, yeah, that sounds good. I want to do that. I would like to feel loved and accepted by God. I would like to be confident in my relationship with Him, able to grow and mature. I would love to be set apart. You know, this word has a lot of baggage, but you know, if you can set all that aside, it's like, I want to walk towards, maybe I shouldn't even say destiny, but it's like what God has destined me for. Did you know God created you with a purpose? Even when you were in your mother's womb, He had a purpose laid out for you. We're all joining His purpose, but He had a unique place inside of His plan to heal the world that only you could do, and He's asking you to do it, and He's giving you the resources. And I'm like, yeah, I would love to do that. I would love to be set apart, living on mission, living towards the purpose that God has for me. So now we ask, well, how in the world do we do that? And there's lots of things. You know, a lot of the church would teach, if you do the Sunday school list, if you read a chapter of your Bible every day and you pray before your meals and you go to church on time and you give a couple dollars, then that's it, right? I think that's incomplete. I think we understand as a community, we are operating in a living faith. We're not trying to check boxes to get God to like us. You know, God already loves you. He doesn't just love you, He likes you. You know, I have a lot of people that I love, I'm not sure I like, right? We don't have to name names, right? Because and God has that same option. God is love. It's like, you know, I used to listen to community, said, that's like baked in. God is love. He has to love you. But God also likes you. You know why He likes you? Because He made you. He knows what purpose you were set apart for. He knows the good that is in you, even if you're not walking in it. He knows the potential that you have to have an incredibly positive impact on the world and expanding His kingdom. He sees that. Okay. So let's begin to dig into why. Transformation is the word that I want to look at for a minute, because that's what we've said these practices are going to do. They're going to create space for God's Spirit to transform us, but we have to start with the baseline. This is normal. Everybody needs to be more like Jesus than you are right now. That is a process of transformation. I've talked to you about this a little bit before. In our Christian walk, and we fully embrace this here at the Vineyard Church, there are times and seasons of process, and there are moments of encounter. And we need and want both. God can take what might take me 3 years and accomplish it in a moment when His Spirit encounters me in a powerful way. But we can't discount the process. We can't just sort of go from encounter to encounter and never intentionally engage in practices where God is going to help us change our life. We need both. I think God requires both, and He desires both so that we can be more like Him. I want to look at this list real quick, and I'm not unpacking this. I'm just like touching it and then going back for later. And then I'm going to get your participation here in a minute. In a book that I read years ago by Dallas Willard called The Spirit of the Discipline. Because what we've been talking about in this series is commonly referred to as spiritual disciplines. Now, we tried to use language to lean more into the relational side of that and not tend towards the legalism of, well, you have to, do the checklist, right? So we've called these intentional practices or unforced rhythms. But Dallas Willard talks about various practices that you can do that give space for transformation, and he divides them into two categories. And I just thought this might help open your mind as you're praying into what practices do you need to engage or drop in this season. And he categorized, now this is not the whole list, but the two categories are practices of engagement. So these are things that we do, that we engage in. Things like compassion, going and serving the poor, working in the food bank, doing street ministry, compassionate ministry. Jesus operated in compassion. He healed the sick. He raised the dead. He did all the things that he did because he felt the compassion of God towards people. That's a practice that we can intentionally engage. Crafting. Now you're laughing because the girls are back there doing some crafting right now. And I could expand on this later. I'm not just talking about like knitting and sewing. Creating. Like there are practices you can do that engage your spirit, and you can invite God into those practices that it can actually become a spiritual discipline. Worship. Obvious. We love worship here. And yes, it's something, well, yeah, the church just does that because we're supposed to, right? But to engage with intentionality, to create space for God to encounter you, to worship from a place of affection in your heart, to not just sing songs. Like, I'll be honest, like it's probably easier to get people to sing songs if we just picked like the top 10 Christian hits. Like we might get more people to sing the song because they know it. They hear it on the radio. That's not our purpose. Our purpose is to worship God. And so we intentionally aim our worship Godward, meaning like towards God. We want to sing to Jesus as if he's real because he is, and as if he's in the room because he is, as if he wants to encounter us in that moment because he does. And then there are practices of exclusion. These are things that we intentionally withdraw from. Solitude and silence. For me, this is a big one. I know some of you in the room, I'm not squarely on either end of the introvert-extrovert spectrum, but I lean towards the introverted side. I'm what's called an introverted extrovert. So I can operate in a crowd. I love to go to a good party. I love to hang out with friends and family. But if I do that for too long, my batteries get drained, and I need to go be alone with Jesus to get my batteries charged back up, right? I have created intentional practices in my life. I didn't put the picture of this up on the screen, but one practice I've done the last couple of years that's been super helpful. There's an app, I may have mentioned it before, called Lectio, Lectio 365. It is a daily, it's not really a devotion. It allows me to listen to scripture. There's daily scriptures and prayers, and it's guided. It's about 5 to 10 minutes. But for me, it's helpful because I'm not discouraging you from reading. You should read, right? But for me, it's a great place to start. I love to listen because I'm not having to do as much. I can allow myself to focus, okay? And I do that when I'm alone. Fasting, we talked about this a little bit last week, intentionally withdrawing from whether it be a meal or things. There's all different kinds of fasting. I don't have time to unpack that. Did you know frugality can be a spiritual discipline? My wife and I haven't done this in a while, baby coming and things, but in the past, we've had a rhythm of what's called a no-spend day. I think, well, why in the world would you do that? And it's not like you're running out of money, because if you run out of money, you don't have a choice. You're going to have a no-spend day, right? But to intentionally say, I'm gonna set aside this 24 hours, and I'm going to focus on God, and I'm not gonna spend resources unless He tells me to give something. That can actually become a spiritual discipline. And then lastly, on this list, friends. You think, "Well, how's that? Are you saying exclude yourself from friends?" No, I'm saying sometimes, especially again for the introverts, I love being in community. Sometimes I need to go to my best friend's house and be with nobody else and just, like, be, right? I need to actually withdraw from being more social, and I need to just be with somebody. Because the other thing about me, and you may be like this or you may be wired different, I am what's called a relator. There's a test called the Clifton Strengths Finder. It helps you understand your strength. One of mine is that I'm a relator, so I like to relate to a small group of people more deeply, as opposed to my wife, who is like instant friends with everybody she sees and has tons of acquaintances and like knows everybody. I know a certain worship leader on the second row who tends more that direction, right? All right. Before I move on to the last part of what I want to say today, which is I think the most important, I want to give you a chance to participate. We've got 1 week left in this series, and we may develop some future content. I want you to take out your phone right now, and I want you to look on this list and see which thing would you be most interested in hearing more about, and I want you to text that word to the number on the screen. You can do this online, 833-397-2882. Feel free. If you don't do text, you can grab one of the Orange Connect cards and just write the word on there and put it in the offering box, which is by the back door. But take just a minute right now and just look at that. And as you're thinking, and do this prayerfully, what would you like to hear more about? I'm not saying that we'll be able to teach on all of it or whatever, but I just thought we want this to be a conversation. And so this is your chance to participate in the conversation. Let us know which one is most interesting or you'd like to hear more. Well, Matthew, what does that look like as an intentional practice? All right. So you can go ahead and finish that as you have time. Text that in, and then we'll collect all of that and synthesize it down into something helpful. I want to tell you a story to close. And it's just funny that I didn't realize that it was going to be the weekend my in-laws were going to be here when I decided to tell this story. But Grandpa Dale was a member of our family. It's my mother-in-law's dad. He's with Jesus now, and we miss him dearly. But when I first met Brittany and started hanging out with their family, one of the things that I noticed the first time we went to Grandpa Dale's house was he had a stock pile of canned vegetables in the back bedroom. And I'm going to put a picture up right now, and most of you probably are not like me, but I had no idea what this was. I had never seen it. But Grandpa Dale had more cases of hominy in that bedroom than any person should ever have. But that was his way of preparing for what he thought might be coming, right? He wasn't going to run out. He had plenty of hominy. I have tried it since. Not my favorite thing. It is what it is. But there's a reason this came back up. I was looking through, I'm just going to plug this. I don't have time to unpack it. Journaling is another really helpful practice that I do. And I have a habit of going back and reviewing past journal entries because I see what God has done. And I was doing that recently, and I came across an entry from March of last year. So this was well before we moved. March 21st, 2024, my wife wakes up and says, "Matt, I had the craziest dream, and I have no idea what it means." And she said, "All I can remember is this phrase, and it was so impactful to me, and it really makes no sense. I don't get it at all, what it's talking about." And she said, like, but I feel it in my spirit. She said, "The hominy is molting." What? She said, "I don't know. What is that?" She said, "The hominy is molting, so get ready for the harvest." Well, my wife is a teacher. My wife is a learner. She says, "I got to find out what is this? Like, what is 'Cause I think of molting, I think of like a bird shedding its feathers, right? So she begins looking it up, and she finds out it's maybe not actually the correct word, but there is an ancient process, and I'm gonna butcher this pronunciation, nixtamalization, by which soaked with lye or lime causes hominy to swell up to two times its size so that it can shed its hull and germ. This process increases the health benefits of the food when you eat it. It like actually makes it more nourishing, more nutritious, and more healthy. And I have to tell you, here we are almost a year and a half later. I'm still not 100% sure what that means to us as a community, but I have some thoughts, and this is where I want to end. I want to share this. Again, I'm not making theological statements. I'm talking to you as a papa in the house. This is some of the things that I feel. And I have these three simple statements that I'm going to just hit these real quick. We need to be transformed. And we've been talking about these practices, but I want to implore you with a strong why. We need to be transformed because we can't participate in Jesus' harvest if we don't start looking and operating more like Jesus. We need it. I need it. I need to look more like Jesus. And that's not, I'm not talking about behavior modification. I'm not saying force yourself to do things that look more right. I'm talking about giving up, surrendering, dying to yourself and saying, Jesus, you come and fill me. You lead me by your Spirit. You tell me what to do. I'm going to go with you. And I think there's a hunger for that level of surrender in this community. But I just want to implore you, we need that. We can't participate in Jesus' harvest if we don't start looking more like Jesus. And we need to be more like Jesus. See, the other thing about these practices, I know those two seem like, well, they're not that different, but here's the focus. We need to be more like Jesus is different than we need to do more like Jesus. Because there's a way that we could just do more things that look like right things and not have our hearts more fully captured by the Lord himself. Jesus showed us what an active, intimate relationship with the Father looked like. And everything that he did flowed out of that relationship in partnership with God's Spirit. Friends, that is a model for us. Everything we do should flow out of intimate, transforming relationship with God led by his Spirit. And so we do need to do Jesus things, but in order to truly do that, we need to be more Jesus. We need to live Jesus, right? We need the kingdom to expand. Now you think, well, why do we need it? Isn't it God's? Isn't he the one? I want what's important to Jesus to be important to me. And the other particular focus on this, I feel, is that it's what we need as a community. We don't need more church. We just don't. We need more Jesus and we need more kingdom. And kingdom looks different than church. And I'm not against church. I have to tell you, if you love Jesus, you should love his bride. The church is important. I am not knocking the church. Matter of fact, like to say, if you come up to me and tell me my wife's ugly, I'm not going to be your friend. Right? So I know the church in America has some ugly things. And I'm willing to call out what's not right when it's my place to do that. But I can't look at what's wrong with the church and say, well, I can do better. I'm going to throw it out. The church is the bride of Jesus. And Jesus says, you need to get ready because when I come back, I'm looking for a bride that is glorious, that is spotless, that doesn't have a wrinkle, that is filled with beauty. And you know who he's talking about? He's talking about us. We don't do that on our own. We don't do that by engaging more religious practices and traditions. We do that by looking more like Jesus, by letting him transform us. The other impression that the Lord gave me was just like that picture of the hominy expanding, is that it actually has to grow to be healthy. Now, I know for some of you this is a touchy subject, maybe not extremely, but just stay with me here. I am not like uncomfortable. Did you know that most churches in America are 75 people or less? Like, that's average. That's normal. And I have seen small churches have more kingdom impact than some of the mega churches that I know. That's a fact. That's true. And I say God bless it. And I say God bless every expression of the church. I know of places where micro churches, like groups of 3 to 5 people meeting in houses, are multiplying like wildfire. God bless it. It doesn't have to look like we think it looks. I'm for all of that, right? In order to be healthy, we have to grow. Now, I'm not talking about, well, we need to get some more butts in the seats so we can increase the budget. It's not what I'm talking about. Living things grow. If we want to be a living, thriving, now I'm not saying this because I think you don't want to do it or that I have to convince you, but my conviction this morning is we need to have a correct paradigm and understanding that it's not self-focused or incorrect to say that we as a church are entering a season where we need to grow. And that doesn't just mean numerically, it includes that. It also means we need to grow in becoming more like Jesus. We need to grow in the ways as a community we have practices that we engage in together, where we have shared experiences and encounters of God that are different than maybe what we have experienced before. We need to grow in our ability to reach and do ministry into the community. We need to swell so that we can shed our shell and be more healthy. Because the beautiful thing is, as things grow, it gets a little harder to control. And we kind of have to let God do his thing. I'm just telling you, I'm preparing you. I don't sense this. I'm not speaking to anybody. But sometimes when a church grows, the church people get uncomfortable. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? Well, we kind of liked what we had. We had a pretty good church. But now it's different. And we've experienced some of that already. But I don't know if you consider an encouragement or a warning, that's not over. I think Jesus' heart is that he has given Vineyard Peoria a portion of the field of harvest in this region to till alongside, hear me, alongside the other churches and streams and ministries in this area. We cannot do it all. We are not called to do it all. We do not need to do it all. We need to be in partnership. But there is a portion or a row in the harvest field that we have the right equipment to till and cultivate to see a kingdom harvest. If we are willing to let Jesus change us, push our buttons, make us uncomfortable, bring people into our community that are going to make us uncomfortable, and I'm shaking my head because I might be that way too. I know I've told some of you this before. Sometimes God brings people into your life, and we like to call them at our house opportunities to grow in grace. Well, you might say yes and amen to, I think the Lord wants to grow us. I think the Lord wants to see his kingdom expand and we can be part of it. But I start feeling question marks whenever I encounter those people that give me the opportunity to grow in grace. We need that growth. We need to not become stale. We need to swell. We need to increase our health. And I'm not laying this on you as a burden. I'm inviting you because I'm convinced Jesus wants this more than we do. I'm just totally convinced of that. And so our question is, are we willing to say yes? Are we willing to partner with him? And I'm going to circle back next week to wrap up this series and focus on some really practical things that I want us to press in and focus on for the rest of the summer that we're going to really dial in and be asking together in unity for Jesus to transform us. Are you willing to go on that journey with me?